Hey everybody, this is Perch, and Jonathan Hickman did a big interview, kind of as a wrap-up to his time on the X-Men. Now, Jonathan Hickman is sticking with Marvel, has some big project, or a project at least, coming. A lot of speculation that it's Spider-Man, and a lot of additional speculation that he'll be working with Chris Bachalo, who, the two have traded a lot of compliments of each other, and you can't tell if that people are just fooling with each other, or whether there's some actual, meat here. But one of the things that came out of that were some of the plans that got dropped. And I think 10 years from now, if people still care, and that's a big question mark, but there's going to be more that will basically confirm what several people, including myself, including Wes, were saying more than a year ago, which is Hickman's plans derailed relatively early. And the signs of him leaving were written on the wall even a year ago. And one of the clear cases for that was the revelation that in Giant Size X-Men, if you're reading along with that, they were trying to do something with Storm. And there's this whole plot line of her being, injured and infected, and the Children of the Vault put a virus. There's this stuff, but it was clunky. If you read those stories, it was odd. But what was further odd about that was that Hickman was really pushing the idea that Giant Size X-Men was going to be an important comic, must read, everything else. But if you read it, it really didn't matter. It didn't matter to the story. It didn't really do anything. It didn't make much sense. Marvel was also saying that Storm was going to have a massive 2021, meaning last year. The massive 2021, and they've said, turned out to be her becoming the regent of Araku on Mars. But that didn't ring quite true, because who cares, to be honest? They're going to do some things with X-Men Red to try and have, Al Ewing is doing something with Storm in that title, and they'll put more emphasis on her. But clearly, this isn't the big plans that they thought they were going to do. Well, what are those big plans? We now know Jonathan Hickman was pushing to have this Giant Size X-Men be revealed that Storm was pregnant with the Black Panther's child. And that basically would give birth, that the child would age via the world and become this, Avengers Next kind of combination of bringing these two worlds together. If you play that even further and you think about kind of the dynamics of the X-Men and kind of the isolationist aspect of what they were doing in this whole storyline, the Avengers, the natural conflict was going to come up, having Storm as the mother with Black Panther would have been pretty significant to those plans. And also, frankly, been kind of a nice addition to Black Panther. I mean, if you think about it, we got out of a storyline of the Black Panther fatherhood, T'Challa fathering a son and or daughter, and Storm, elevating her process and also tapping into history, and the fact that what we got instead was this kind of very weird T'Challa in space storyline that just went confusingly nowhere from Coates. We got his series wrapped up, a long delay, and now we're getting a John Ridley kind of storyline about how some sleeper agents have been exposed. It's not been the best Black Panther year. And Storm also didn't get that moment. So anyway, that's a pretty big kind of moment, but this was basically derailed. They said no. And this was back in, more than a year ago. The Giant Size X-Men plans were being conducted in late 2020. So that gives you a little bit of a sense of at what point did the wheels start to come off the bus? At what point was Hickman's vision going outside of his control? Well, now we have our answer more than a year ago. And that's why the spring, does seem to kind of, it leads credence to the idea that he was checking out at that point, or at least being told to check out. But in addition to that, we learned about a number of other books that Hickman wanted to launch as part of X. And this is where it gets a little bit scary, because there's already too many books. And so we learned that there was actually 5 more that Hickman wanted to do, including a Moira X book, which was we were told was coming and then never did. And that was going to be written by Al Ewing. That sort of became Inferno. So basically it feels like the plot of Inferno, of Moira and everything that happened to her, was a very compressed version of what was going to play out in the Moira X comic, which was intended to either be a ongoing or prestige format or something. But we learned that there's some other titles here, including Hellfire Club kids, basically the Emma's kids, and the fact that you've got this group that's been resurrected in some cases, and they could you know play with this group. You had a title, Generation X, where they wanted to revive that old book, and then that basically Hickman wanted to have a comic for each of the generations of Academy kids. You could have a New Mutants book, a Generation X book, the Hellfire Club book. So you had basically each generation of these comics, of these eras of the X-Men. He also wanted to do an Imperial Guard book with Bobby and Sam, and that was clearly set up in the very beginning with what they did with Bobby and Sam and the Imperial Guard and kind of the different aspects of that was completely just dropped and ignored relatively quickly after that. Basically as 2020 came to a close, Hickman was writing that storyline in New Mutants, and it was clearly going to be a spin-off into something else. Well, it was going to spin off into an Imperial Guard book. And then in addition, he wanted to write a Mr. Sinister book. And that this was, that maybe Kieran would come back in to write this. This was also hinted at during the Sinister Secrets way back in House of X Powers of 10. Clear they wanted to do this. So basically that, doing something very focused on Sinister. Some of those plot lines obviously went into Hellions and what they're doing with the Quiet Council, and Gillian is most likely going to pick up on a bunch of Sinister threads with the Immortal X-Men. But that was where he was going. The takeaway from all this is, number one, a bunch of people have speculated that Hickman didn't want to do a bunch of books and Marvel forced it on him. And to the contrary, Hickman wanted to do more. So Hickman clearly had in his mind, I don't know, a lineup of 15 to 20 books by count. Not knowing if some of these other books came in, with his idea or not. But he was clearly pushing for a bigger line. The other thing we can kind of take from this is the point at which Hickman's original plan deviated was not in, in the Ten of Swords storyline, or not in the last 6 months. It was actually back fairly quickly. House of X Powers of 10 came out, and then they had the Dawn of X storyline with 6 titles that Hickman was wanting to push to 12 to 15 by the sound of it. And somewhere in the winter time frame of 2020, the plans went in a different direction. My only assumption here is that House of X Powers of 10 did better than the corporate people at Marvel thought. That Brevoort and Jordan White, who was the group editor for X-Men, kind of kicked into gear and decided to do something different. It's important to recognize that the X-Men lineup was just in a dismal state before Hickman came in. It wasn't selling particularly well. It had languished for several years via Marvel's reluctance to do things that were Fox properties. And so Hickman coming in it almost felt like they tossed it to him. In fact, Hickman said that he'd been pushing to go onto the X-Men, wanting to correct a bunch of the wrongs of the X-Men. Ironically, he wound up creating some new ones. But it sounded like he was pushing for this for years, even prior to Secret Wars, of coming in to want to do this. If you remember, if we go further back in time, Rick Remender was meant to go onto the X-Men books. He wound up leaving the company out of frustration, and the books further kind of struggled. Hickman was apparently pushing for the job this whole time. And this also, by the way, explains some of the key moments of like the Phoenix Egg and other things that Hickman wound up doing in Secret Wars. But he clearly had a passion for wanting to do this. He had a vision. The vision, I think, is got some pros and cons to it. But it was derailed relatively easy. What I think happened was Marvel had all but forgotten about the X-Men, or basically had relegated that to a B or C list property. It blew up via House of X Powers of 10, and suddenly Marvel kind of stepped into gear and said, okay, we want to control more of this. And by the December-January timeframe of 2020, it had started to deviate from Hickman's control, but in a sloppy way. Because, for example, the Storm pregnancy storyline, clearly there was setup done for that storyline. A lot of these ideas that Hickman had, he had started to roll things out. Stuff went out into press. the entire New Mutants bit. Clearly, they were moving down that road, and then things went in a different direction. So this indicates that editorial stepped in, I don't know, fairly abruptly and just, changed plans. And that's how we got what we got. Interesting to see kind of this stuff coming out again, I think, as the years go by. Hickman's still playing with Marvel, so everybody's going to be nice about everything on all directions. But I'm still struck by, Wes and I both predicted in early 2021 that things, January, February, that things that Hickman would be off the title within a year or two. And clearly that was the case. There's no denying that at this point. So it's just interesting to see the timeline of how everything worked, and it does make you wonder at what point, his mind completely started going to other things. But let me know in the comments below, did you want to see these books? I have to admit, the Storm Black Panther storyline would have been a smart one for everybody involved. Storm, Black Panther, the Marvel Universe, that would have been a clever thing to do. They hurt themselves by not pulling the trigger on that, and what we got instead was a lot of nothing. So that's a shame. But let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Of course, like and subscribe, as always, and thanks for listening.